Winter, 878 AD. Somewhere in the marshlands of Somerset, a man sits alone by a dying fire, watching a woman's bread burn on the hearth because his mind is 1,000 miles away, drowning in disaster. She scolds him. She has no idea who he is. And that single detail tells you everything about how far this man has fallen. Because 6 months earlier, this same man wore a crown. He commanded armies. He was the last hope of an entire people. Now he is a fugitive hiding in a swamp, so broken, so invisible, that a peasant woman can shout at him for ruining her dinner, and never once suspect she is looking at the King of Wessex. His name was Alfred. History would later call him the Great. But greatness was nowhere in sight on that freezing night in the marshes. On that night, there was only a man who had lost his kingdom, lost his army, lost almost everything, and somehow, impossibly, was about to become the reason England exists at all. To understand how low he fell, you have to understand what he was fighting. In the 9th century, the Viking storm was not a raid. It was an invasion, methodical and merciless, sweeping across the island of Britain like a plague that would not stop. The Norse called themselves the Great Heathen Army, and the name was not an exaggeration. One by one, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms broke beneath them. Northumbria fell, East Anglia fell, its king killed in a way so brutal the stories of it still make people flinch 1,000 years later. Mercia fell, its king fleeing into exile, never to return. Of the great English kingdoms, only one remained standing. Wessex, in the south, the last unconquered piece of a nation that was rapidly ceasing to exist. And Wessex belonged to Alfred. He had not wanted the throne. He was the youngest of 5 brothers, never raised to expect a crown, more interested as a child in poetry and learning than in war. But death has a way of rearranging plans, and one by one his brothers died, some in battle, some from illness, until there was no one left standing between Alfred and the responsibility of holding back an entire continent's worth of fury with a single kingdom. He became king in 871, at 21 years old, in the middle of a war he had no realistic chance of winning. His own brother had died fighting the Danes just weeks before. Alfred buried him and picked up the crown in the same breath. For years he fought. He negotiated. He bought time with silver when he could not buy it with steel, paying off Viking armies the way a man bails water out of a sinking ship. Not to win, but simply to survive one more season. And for a while, it worked. Wessex held. Barely, painfully, but it held. Then came January of 878. It was 12th night, the depths of winter, when no army was supposed to move, when even the Vikings were expected to be resting by their fires, rather than marching through the frost. It was the one time of year Alfred should have been safe. Instead, a Viking force under a king named Guthrum did what no one expected. They attacked in the dead of winter, striking Alfred's stronghold at Chippenham with total surprise. There was no battle to speak of, no glorious last stand. There was only chaos, a kingdom's court scattered in the space of a single night, nobles cut down or fleeing in every direction, and a king who had commanded armies just hours before, now running for his life through the winter dark, with nothing but the men closest to him. Wessex, the last free kingdom of England, had just fallen in an instant. And its king was gone, not dead, but worse in a way. Vanished, humiliated, as good as finished in the eyes of anyone watching. This is the part of the story most kings never come back from. This is where empires end and names disappear from the history books, filed away as the king who lost his kingdom, and nothing more. Alfred had every reason to become exactly that. A footnote, a cautionary tale, a name people mention only to say, and then he was never heard from again. Instead, he went into the marshes. The Somerset Levels were, and still are, one of the strangest landscapes in England, a maze of waterlogged fen and reed and hidden channels, nearly impassable to anyone who didn't know its secrets. Alfred and a handful of loyal men retreated to a small, easily defensible island buried deep inside that wilderness, a place called Athelney. From the outside, it looked like nothing. A king reduced to hiding in a swamp with a shrinking band of followers, subsisting on whatever the marsh and the loyalty of desperate men could provide. It is here that the old legend places him. The burnt cakes, the scolding peasant woman, the king so stripped of his former glory that not even his own subjects recognized him. Historians argue about how much of that particular story is true, and how much was added later to make a good tale better. But the emotional truth of it is not in question at all. Alfred, in that winter, was as close to nothing as a king can be and still be called a king. And this is the moment that matters most in his entire story. Not the victory that came after, but the choice he made while he still had nothing. Because it would have been so easy to stop. To slip away into exile across the sea, as the King of Mercia had done. To accept that Wessex, like every other English kingdom, now belonged to the Danes. No one would have blamed him. He had already given everything he had. He didn't stop. While hidden in Athelney, Alfred did something almost no defeated king in history manages to do. He rebuilt, in secret, from absolutely nothing. He sent word out through the loyal networks that still existed beneath the surface of a conquered land. To the Thegns, the local lords, the men who had scattered rather than surrendered. He asked them to trust that the king was still alive, still fighting, and to meet him at an appointed time and place. It was, in essence, a gamble that loyalty could survive defeat, that people would rally not to a crown, but to a cause. They came. In May of 878, just months after hiding from a peasant woman's scolding, Alfred emerged from the marshes at a place called Egbert's Stone, and the men of Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire came to meet him, not because he commanded them to, but because they chose to. It is one of the great turning points in English history, and it happened almost entirely out of view, built in secret in a swamp by a man everyone else had already written off. What followed was the Battle of Edington. Alfred marched his newly reassembled army against Guthrum's forces and did something the English hadn't managed in years. He won, decisively, driving the Viking army into retreat and laying siege to them until they surrendered. But it's what Alfred did after the victory that truly separates him from almost every other conqueror in history. He did not slaughter his enemy. He did not seek revenge for the humiliation of Chippenham or the terror of the marshes. Instead, he made Guthrum an offer. Convert to Christianity, accept baptism, and Alfred himself would stand as godfather. Guthrum agreed. The former enemy king was baptized, took a new name, and the two men who had been trying to destroy each other months earlier now sat down and carved up the map of England between them, Wessex to remain free under Alfred, the Danish-controlled lands to the north and east to become what history would call the Danelaw. It was not a total victory. England was still divided. But the piece that mattered most, the last free kingdom, the one that still spoke to what England could become, had survived. And it had survived because a man who lost everything refused to disappear. What Alfred did next is, in some ways, even more remarkable than the war itself. He understood something that most kings of his era never grasped, that a kingdom cannot be defended by armies alone. So he built burhs, a network of fortified towns positioned so that no part of Wessex was ever more than a day's march from a place of refuge and defense, a system so effective that it became the blueprint for English urban planning for centuries. He reorganized his military so that soldiers could rotate between farming and fighting, solving the age-old problem of armies that dissolved every planting season. He commissioned a fleet of ships, some say the beginning of what would eventually become the English Navy. And remembering the boy who once loved poetry more than politics, he personally drove a revival of learning and literacy across his kingdom, translating Latin texts into English himself, establishing schools, insisting that education was not a luxury for a broken people, but the very foundation on which they would rebuild. By the time Alfred died in 899, he was no longer just the king who had survived. He was the king who had saved something no one thought could be saved. Not just a kingdom, but the idea of an English identity itself. Historians would later note that every legitimate king of England after him could trace their line back to Alfred. He is, to this day, the only English monarch ever given the title the Great. Not for the size of his empire, not for the battles he won, but for what he built out of the wreckage of nearly losing everything. And that, in the end, is the part of his story worth carrying with you. Alfred is not remembered because he never failed. He is remembered because failure was, for a moment, total. A burned crown, a vanished kingdom, a man unrecognized in his own land. And he chose, in the silence of that swamp, not to accept it as the end of the story. Every great collapse in history offers the same quiet question to the person standing in its ruins. Is this where it stops? Or is this where it starts again? Alfred answered that question from a hiding place in the reeds, with nothing but a handful of loyal men and a refusal to disappear. Sometimes the difference between a forgotten king and an immortal one isn't the crown at all. It's what a person does in the months nobody is watching, when they have every reason to believe it's already over.